When we think of Konami, we generally think of espionage, soccer, fog, sexy vampire hunters, children's card games, using your feet to press buttons instead of your hands, terrorism, memes, really awful rock band clones.
Oh no!
But we don't normally think of racing games. Not to say that Konami hasn't dabbled in the racing genre before, of course, but no one remembers any of these nearly as much as Metal Gear Solid or Contra or Bomberman, which is a shame, because this game right here deserves to be remembered just as much as any other Konami property. Enthusia Professional Racing. You may have heard it in passing conversation or randomly mentioned on the internet, the latter of which is almost always preceded with, "I thought it was euthanasia professional racing there for a hot minute," but otherwise only those who have a deep love for the sim racing genre will remember it, due in part to two reasons. The first, Konami had a brain lapse and decided it would be best to release it within months of the tour de force that was Gran Turismo 4. Enthusia is a sim racer that plays very similarly, so for a lot of people there was no reason to get the less established game with less cars and circuits. There just wasn't. Kid Vale would have done the exact same thing, because 700 cars? Not gonna lie, that's pretty tantalizing. The second reason though is that it had very middling reception, much of which seemed unfair in my honest opinion. Like this one review that praises it for its innovation in the genre, but thinks its multiplayer is unimpressive. Cool, so was Gran Turismo 4's, dude. You didn't give that a 7 out of 10.
The sound is unremarkable. You've got your engine sounds, your squealing tires, and all your other sound effects that sound like you've heard them before.
The sound is unremarkable. You've got your gunshots, your orders from your captain, and all your other sound effects that sound like you've heard them before.
With a fully analog control scheme, it could have been quite good.
It couldn't be any less analog if it tried. What fucking gobshite is this?
One of the least user-friendly gaming experiences I've had in a long time.
So if it came out now in an era in which Dark Souls exists, it'd get a 10 out of 10, right? Oh no, I'm gonna get crucified for that.
The simple fact is Enthusia is a simulation of life, but has little life itself.
What does this even mean?
Appalling presentation, rank front end,
whatever that means,
awful music, and visuals that won't have you gawping in awe if you saw them on a demo pod.
Can we cancel Eurogamer? Anyway, that's enough of me complaining about 15-year-old reviews that get the shits with the game because they try to win by wall riding and ramming opponents out of the way only to get punished for not playing the game properly. I want to show everyone why, even in a world where the arguably superior Gran Turismo and Forza Motorsport exist, Enthusia is still very much worth your time. For reference, I'm emulating this on PC because recording PS2 footage natively is a disaster in every sense of the word. There's a couple imperfections here and there, such as not always reaching 60 FPS, as well as these weird lines that occasionally appear on the side of the screen in dark areas. I'm sure you guys can deal with it. What? Okay, we gotta address this intro cutscene. What the fuck? What the fuck does any of this have to do with anything? This is a very poor representation of what the game is all about. Showing images of this photographer and her family is incredibly misleading because they never turn up in any part of the game after this. There's no story, at all. There's no racing amongst traffic either, and there's certainly no mention of this anonymous chap either, whoever that is. My guess is that there was supposed to be some sort of overarching story, but was scrapped either due to development deadlines or because they saw R-Racing Evolution from a year or so back and decided they didn't want their game being known for shit like that.
Don't you know any shortcuts?
You want shortcuts? Well, I'll show you some shortcuts. Hold on to your seat and onto his oxygen mask.
Once you get past whatever that was, you can finally start up Enthusia Life mode. For all intents and purposes, this is your career, or GT mode, the main meat of the game. You select from 12 mostly undesirable cars, although I would absolutely drive a Mazda Cosmo Sport in real life, before getting dumped into the event select screen. But already, something's a little different. Unlike Gran Turismo or Forza, there isn't a traditional list of races and championships to complete. Instead, Enthusia runs off a slightly convoluted calendar system. Each week you'll be offered a pool of races to choose from. Depending on a variety of factors after completing a race, your rank will go up or down, and if your rank is high enough, you'll be able to compete in higher tier events against better cars. You start at rank 1000. The ultimate goal is to reach RS tier, which requires you to be rank 50 or higher, and will allow you to compete in special seasonal events that only roll around once per year. Keeping up so far? Good. Now, as I said, how much you rank up after a race is determined by a number of factors. One of the most important factors is your odds of winning a particular race. You could enter a race with a Porsche or a Mercedes and decimate the competition, but the odds of you winning will be so high in almost all circumstances that you just won't get that many points. The game encourages you to try your luck against the competition in a comparatively underpowered car. The lower your odds of winning, the more points you'll get after winning a race. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Your rank is determined by your 9 best races in the past 12 weeks. You could win a race by a country mile, but if you don't get more points than any one of your 9 best races out of the past 12 weeks, your rank falls. And with that comes the risk of being booted out of higher tiers, missing out on special events entirely until they roll around the next year. Still with me? Nice, dude. I'm proud of you.
Now brace yourself, cause there's more.
During races, you're under the imposing tyranny of the, Enthu point system? What the fuck? This thing demands you drive perfectly. If you so much as roll over a blade of grass, this bad boy depletes faster than you can say, wait, since when was Vale a furry? If you go off-road or collide with a barricade or other cars on the track, chunks will start dropping from this thing like headlights out of a 10-year-old boy in the Australian winter. And if you run out of Enthu points, you're fresh out of luck, because you gotta sit the next week out. And that, of course, means risking losing your place in the rankings. It's a little complicated, yes, and it might take a little while to click. Hell, I expect some people won't like it at all, what with the lack of actual events to complete and tick off. I myself will admit that I prefer Gran Turismo 4's GT mode, with its concrete list of events and whatnot. But there's a certain rhythm to Enthusia's unique career mode that I find really enjoyable. It's not just about entering and winning races, it's about that delicate balance of driving cleanly and keeping your rank as high as possible. And it can feel pretty damn rewarding at times. Not gonna lie, sometimes Gran Turismo 4 feels pretty unfulfilling because it's so easy to cheese your way through that game. What with the lack of car damage, which Enthusia also doesn't have by the way, or any sort of penalty system, as well as being able to just pick the most powerful car possible and obliterate the competition. Comparatively, you can only really make progress in Enthusia by, well, if you'll excuse the lingo, getting good. Although there are 2 small annoyances that hinder progression a little bit. On one hand, if your opponent decides they want to get close for a little sniff of your ass but end up getting too close and making contact with you, you're the one that gets punished, which can feel pretty unfair, especially when you're trying to break out of the pack and everyone decides it's time to perform a rolling roadblock. On the other hand, really weird design choice, changing cars uses up a week of your time. I don't know how it could possibly take a whole ass week to get out of one car and into another, but if you find your current car just isn't keeping up anymore and you want to change things up, the game decides that's a punishable offense. No, bad. Sit your ass back in that Honda Civic, bitch. The nature of the game means that you won't be racing a lot of high-end cars, even when you start unlocking A-class cars, which are the best of the bunch outside of purpose-built race cars. Much of my playthrough early on was spent in a Citroen DS Dallas, an E-class car with just over 100 horsepower, trying to see how far I could push myself in such an underpowered machine. Racing well and minimizing collisions will give you points that level up your car and increase various stats, but even then, I was still driving a Citroen. There was only so far I could push myself. But something about gallivanting around in such a weak car is kind of fun, in a sense. The tracks themselves are designed in such a way that they're equally fun to drive a tiny sports car and a prototype Le Mans machine around, in a way that Gran Turismo, in my opinion, sometimes has a lot of trouble doing. I was happy to unlock whatever car was offered to me because they were genuinely such a joy to drive, no matter how comparatively underpowered they were. I kinda wish you didn't progress up the rankings so quickly, to be honest, because once you reach the higher tiers, there's very little point in driving anything that isn't at least a B or C class. You can stay in slower cars and race lower tiers if you want, but progression will almost completely halt as a result. If anything though, I kinda like racing in the lower tiers a bit more, because once you progress to the higher tiers, they start throwing the same events at you quite a bit. It's especially apparent when you get behind the wheel of an R-Class vehicle, where the only tracks that ever seem to be available are Nürburgring and a bajillion laps around discount Indianapolis. You could stay in the lower tiers and unlock one of the many daily drivers available, from my mum's Toyota minivan to that green Subaru Forester you probably see on a daily basis hanging out outside the local kebab shop, or you can progress normally, where you'll find yourself up against Lancers, Skylines and the like. There's a very distinct focus on cars you regularly see on the road, with the most powerful road-going cars being things like the Mercedes SLR McLaren or the Bugatti EB110. There's some neat surprises in the car roster too, ones that other racing games wouldn't get until years later. The De Tomaso Pantera and the BMW M1 Pro car, for example. There's only only 211 cars in the game, but even with the focus on less powerful cars, it's a pretty diverse lineup. At the very least, there aren't 527 Skylines. None of that,
but this one's midnight purple. It totally deserves its own spot.
bullshit, thank you very much. Without a concrete list of events, a showroom to buy new cars from, or even any sort of currency system, you're probably wondering how you're supposed to win cars then. Well, before Forza Horizon 4 was dishing out 318 cars and Jeff Bezos' net worth every race, Enthusia was the game that ensured you won new cars as frequently as possible, though it was from a good old-fashioned raffle system. Finish a race and you'll get a chance to win one of your opponent's cars for yourself. This method ensures you've always got new options when you finally decide to bench your 100 horsepower turd, although there's always a chance you'll win nothing 3 fucking times in a row. Also, interesting tidbit, the raffle is fixed right from the start. Playing in an emulator obviously allowed me to take advantages of save states, which I don't normally do, but I decided to use them because there was a car that I really wanted to win. So I saved just before the roulette started and reloaded the save when I got some shitty thing I didn't want. But every time I reloaded, I'd always get the same disappointing result. The only explanation is that Konami knew some stupid YouTuber was going to try and game the system in 15 years' time. Clever bastards. Now, all this wouldn't be that exciting if the actual driving wasn't up to scratch, but it definitely is. If you've played Gran Turismo before, you'll likely adapt very easily. The game fits very snugly into that grey area we call simcade. Not quite a full racing sim, but not quite an arcade racer either, although I'd say it's leaning more toward the sim side of things. One of the main differences here is that the cars are heavy. Regardless of if you're driving the driftiest of rear-wheel drives to the grippiest of four-wheel drives with traction control and stability management on, expect to wrestle with your car quite a bit. Not that that's a bad thing, it actually makes a lot of the less powerful cars really fun to drive in my opinion. Obviously if you're easy on the throttle and all that, you can avoid the copious amounts of oversteering, but at the same time, the shit is fun, dog. A common complaint in reviews from back when the game came out was that rear-wheel drive cars were impossible to drive, oversteering at the mere thought of a curve. I thought, no, there's no way they're that hard to drive. These reviewers are probably just supremely bad at racing games or something. Oh god, Jesus fuck! This fucking sucks, dude. They're completely undrivable. Like, I get it, you gotta be gentle with the throttle and don't throw yourself into turns, but I'm being as careful as I possibly can, and I still end up kissing the wall at 100 miles an hour. This really shakes up my soda. Is what I would say if I didn't go digging through the options menu, where I conveniently found the setting to adjust driving aids. By default it's set to recommended, which means some cars will have traction control and stability management enabled, while others simply won't. In what universe is spinning out because you had a brief moment where you thought about tilting the left stick recommended, Konami? Do you recommend that Snake's ass cheeks clap every time he takes a step, alerting the guards? Turn the assists on and you'll have a much better time, but I'm surprised how difficult it is to keep your car under control with them turned off, even when compared to its competitors with the same settings disabled. Enthusia is very adamant that it wants to kick your ass. So alongside cars being hard to handle with the driving aids turned off, there aren't any other traditional assist options either, like a driving line or even a difficulty select. There's no relying on any of that. So your only option if you find yourself having trouble is to improve as a driver, which isn't the most accessibility-friendly idea ever, but is also somewhat refreshing. Oh, you've probably noticed this thing by now too. This is the VGS, the Visual Gravity System. It's a live telemetric display that shows you information about things like tire traction and lateral Gs. It's forgive me for being a literal child, but it's pretty funny watching this border wobble about as you drive over bumps and stuff, but otherwise it's kind of a useless feature. It takes up precious space on the screen, which you can't even set to widescreen by the way, and doesn't really relay any information you can't deduce yourself simply by playing the game. The developers actually prided themselves on the fact that they managed to replicate real-world driving physics more accurately than any other game at the time. That is, your car responds with the appropriate amount of lean when turning, braking, or accelerating from a standstill. When you slam the brakes, you really feel the weight shifting. You don't need the VGS to convey this information for you because the game itself already does a terrific job of it. I guess maybe they were just a little too proud of their achievement, but I mean, who wouldn't be? things start to get a little divisive when it comes to the track selection in Enthusia. A lot of criticism is aimed at the fact that there's only 2 real-life circuits in the game, which, sure, okay, they got Tsukuba and Nürburgring, but that's still only 2. The salt on the wound is that they show up in the event select annoyingly often, Tsukuba having night and wet weather variants and both Tsukuba and Nürburgring being drivable in reverse. This shit is cursed, man. If you're not into racing games and you have no idea what I'm talking about, imagine, I don't know, Donkey Kong running around in Sandover Village, or eating a chocolate cornet from the bottom, whichever end that is. Shouldn't be done. There's a reason Forza doesn't let you drive the Nürburgring in reverse. It wasn't designed to be driven like that. In fact, almost every track in Enthusia has a variant where you drive it in reverse, and it's quite obvious that this is done to pad out the track list. By my count, I might be missing 1 or 2, but there are 21 track configurations, 5 of which are rally tracks and 4 of which are more designed for test purposes in the driving revolution mode, which we'll get to a little later. That's only 14 road tracks you get to properly race on, not including reverse versions or weather conditions, which is pretty low. That's 14 track configurations, by the way, not 14 locations. I'm very happy to say that it's quality over quantity here, however. And I'm going to go as far as saying that the original tracks Konami created here are just as fun, or in some cases even more fun than Polyphony and Turn 10's offerings. Now I don't want to turn this into too much of a pissing contest, but while Gran Turismo's tracks are very well designed, they're not very interesting visually or thematically. Only those who've spent time with it could tell Deep Forest, Trial Mountain, Midfield Raceway and Grand Valley apart. Most of its original tracks are set in a forest or plains or some pretty generic looking location, which is especially true of Gran Turismo Sport. I legit could not tell you the difference between the vast majority of these tracks. Couldn't even tell you the names, to be honest. But we're getting sidetracked. This isn't a Gran Turismo review. Yet. We're talking about Enthusia here, and it has some extremely memorable track design. Very few of these are attempts at making actual circuits, often set in forests, villages, cities, and mountains in varying times of day, making for much more striking and interesting settings for racing through. One of the very first tracks you come across, Marco Strada, is set on a boardwalk in a seaside European city, with both a daytime version and a version set during a downpour at night, which looks gorgeous. There's a track called, oh god, I feel like I'm reading patrons' names out, Bergenschlucht? I don't know, that's set in a, I want to say, German village with a lot of tight, twisty roads and a section that opens up for a brief high-speed battle against opponents. Pacific Gateway is an American city track with huge jumps that goes through both a commercial and residential district with a view that overlooks what seems to be the Golden Gate Bridge. Probably. I don't know, I'm not fucking Catriona Roundtree. There's a couple other European city circuits with low-speed corners as well. Actually, it's a bit of a running theme with Enthusia, both of which are quite difficult to avoid grinding against the barricades on. Very challenging, but fun to master. For the Initial D fans out there, there's a great little downhill stage known as the Dragon Range. If taking hairpins at 10 miles per hour is your thing, you'll be right at home here. There's also Speediapolis, for those who enjoy turning left for 8 minutes. Also, shit you not, there's a track called the Cosmic Eggway. I'm trying to tell everyone why this game is a hidden gem, and shit like this ain't helping. In terms of rally tracks, Mystic Caves and Edge of the Road kind of bleed together due to being tracks that weave in and out of caves or underground areas, despite the latter in particular being pretty enjoyable with a really fun high-speed section. Wintertraum? What?
Wintertraum.
Okay, thank you, Google. Wintertraum is a variant of Bergenschlugen that turns the quaint village into a winter wonderland. And then there's the Mirage Crossing, which is a pretty uninteresting romp across an unnamed desert. By far the best track in my opinion is Enthusia's only attempt at a permanent non-oval racetrack, the Löwenzee-Ring. I think that's right, but I don't care, give up. This track comes quite late in the game, and as if to hammer in the fact that you're nearing the end, you get your own little airshow flying overhead as you take off from the start line. It's small things like this that help give Enthusiast circuits a lot of character, but the other thing that helps even more is the often debated soundtrack. People hate this soundtrack. Especially back at launch, critics were seemingly very upset that Enthusia had a soundtrack that played a specific song on each circuit rather than a licensed soundtrack. And I mean, sure, maybe romping around Autumn Mountain to the Hives or Queens of the Stone Age or something might have been great. But once again, Enthusia dares to be different. And in my eyes, it paid off massively. Let's jump back to Löwenzee-Ring. On its own, it's a solid track, obscured by Overcast, lending it a sort of moody atmosphere. But when we insert the song The Infinite End from the OST, suddenly it turns into something much more. This sounds more amazing than a jaunt around a circuit in an Audi TT has any right to be. It's already exciting enough, but the music turns it into a make or break situation, like the difference between winning and losing is life and death. And this praise extends to the entire soundtrack. While the circuits are good enough on their own, the song that accompanies them each help to solidify their own unique atmosphere. Route de la Seine has a peppy tune backed up by accordions and violins, giving it a regal and sophisticated flair. Speediopolis hits hard with a fantastic rock ensemble complete with a guitar solo that goes ballistic, perfect for going over 200 miles per hour. Dragon Range sounds probably just as you'd expect, though there ain't nothing wrong with that. And Marco Strada has a fantastic orchestral score that's both very pretty and unbelievably exciting. Especially funny since you're mostly going to be driving stuff like minivans and key cars through this circuit. One of the weirdest songs in the game has to be the one that plays while you're making your way around the 20-kilometer Nürburgring Norgenschlogen. Listen to the opening and tell me this sounds like something you'd expect from a racing game. Yeah, right? This is where you'd expect the biggest and most bombastic song in the soundtrack, but instead it turns out to be this eerie, somber accompaniment that goes for 8 or 9 minutes and spends the first 5 or 6 of those playing whale noises. Only to really kick in not long before the finish line. This level of experimental soundtrack usage is what Enthusia was criticised for back in 2005, and I do see where they're coming from. It's not the most exciting song in the world, but I think pairing it with the visuals, a moody early morning landscape, combines to make Enthusia's version of Nürburgring one of the most unique in the genre. It seems ethereal and almost otherworldly, like you've travelled to this surreal alternate dimension just to race a Subaru Impreza for 8 minutes. And that's why, even though there aren't that many tracks to begin with, almost every single one is an absolute joy to play. They're all expertly designed, look great both aesthetically and technically. Sometimes, what the fuck is going on with this city on Dragon Range? Why does it look like it's peering in from a window from an alternate dimension? And have music that only serves to elevate whatever tone each location is going for. The only time the music gets a little repetitive is when you reach the later stages of Enthusia Life Mode, where races are anywhere between 6 to 20 minutes long, but the songs loop after 2. As much as I love this soundtrack, set up a Spotify playlist if you find yourself in it for the long haul. Heck, I'll leave one in the description for you. Outside of the Enthusia Life mode, there's the standard free play, time trial and multiplayer modes. But while it has the decency to not bombard you with license tests before you're even allowed to compete, it does have its own take on license tests, in the form of the Driving Revolution mode. This mode is a bit full of itself, I'd hesitate to call it a revolution, but it's actually kind of addictive. This mode requires you to drive through gates at a certain speed. If this line is in the middle as you pass through it, that means you're doing it right. If it's lower, you're too slow, and if it's higher, you're too fast. Apart from these gates, which let you drive through them as fast as you wish, and these gates, which indicate you should ease off the accelerator and start applying the brakes, that's pretty much the fundamentals covered. It sounds simple enough, but the challenge very quickly ramps up. The first few stages are just kind of glorified license tests, showing you the ideal racing line through a section of a circuit, so they aren't overly difficult. But then the game starts placing the gates in wacky places all over the track, and sometimes even off the track. So even if you know Autumn Mountain like the back of your Dorito dust encased hand, these challenges are still going to throw you for a loop. Some, admittedly, are kind of unfair, and stability and traction control are turned off for all the rear-wheel drive cars, so you kinda have to deal with that. So yeah, those parts are a bit of a buzzkill, but you can hit retry and be back at the start in an instant. And something about driving through gates and earning perfects is just so inherently satisfying. The game really likes to rub it in your face if you fail though. Instead of actual advice, it got George Wood to write these blurbs instead. Duh, idiot. If you're having trouble, maybe just stop fucking having trouble, dude. Enthusia is derivative in some areas. It's wannabe Gran Turismo attitude occasionally holding it back. But it's also a game that dares to be unique, even if it knows that people aren't gonna vibe with it. The career mode might not prove to be as satisfying to blast through as other games in the genre, the music might drive you mad, and the focus on cars your nan might drive will definitely turn some people away if they weren't already considering it. But this is a game that absolutely would not be made today. Sure, Konami wouldn't make it in this day and age, and if they did, it would either be a flaming car wreck or they'd find some way to turn it into a pachinko machine with unreasonably good graphics, but even considering how it's structured, it just seems a little too out there, especially for a sim racer on the leaner end of the spectrum. It doesn't shower you in credits and tell you you're the greatest driver ever after every race. It cracks the whip and tells you to get cracking. It pushes you to do better. It forces you to forego your instincts to play bumper cars with your opponents and pushes you to drive to the very best of your ability. Unfortunately, Enthusia is long forgotten by all but a few, only having its tracks turn up in a coin-op arcade racer several years later. Its Wikipedia entry is a stub, there don't seem to be many copies floating around, and even though I'll praise it to the high heavens and back, if I had to pick between it and Gran Turismo 4 as the only game to play during self-isolation in a global pandemic, I'd pick GT4 in a heartbeat. It's a shame that Enthusia had to live under Gran Turismo's shadow. Konami killed this franchise before it could even roll over the start line. I would love a sequel to Enthusia, but I would fear that would curl a finger on the monkey's paw in this day and age. I don't trust Konami to do the game justice, but with how sterile the racing genre is right now, I think Enthusia's quirkiness and punishing gameplay is what the genre needs. But it's not meant to be. Instead, we can at least appreciate the game we got, and pray to God that Konami never, ever touches this series again. I beg you, please. As ever, thank you to all my patrons, including Chris Howard, Damian Maxted, Nation McAltar, Artyom, Run Fast There Smith, Danny Covarubius, Foxifier, Ratchet Mania, Alice Whitaker Bartlett, The Dervinator, Sodden Grider, Sparky Butterfloof, Matt Beaker, Ace00, Dakota Lewis, Julian Brown, Nathaniel Forrest, Isaac Lamp, Waster USA, Duncan Austin, Pastor Boy, Leo Alex 50, Heat Hoot Skyat, Global Truncation Era, Laurent Lacroix, Sheepy, Gampnikan, Sebastian Orbe, Travis Miranda, Thomas Hart, Lazaro Dave, The Ruby Red Rose, and Philip Elk. Consider donating to my Patreon and you will get access to, let's see, what was there? I'm drawing a blank. Polls for reviews that I'm going to do. You guys can decide which game I'll be reviewing next, which those polls will be starting up in the near future. And if you consider donating $5 or more, you'll not only get 24-hour early access to videos, but you can also watch them ad-free, so you don't get ads for Spud the Gaming Slug showing up on my videos. Oh my god, I'm sorry, that's mean. Hey Spud, you want to collab sometime? And I will see you guys in the next poorly planned video.